Ja, dann kommst du. Ja. Guten Abend. Nehmen Sie bitte Platz. Wir wollen gleich starten. Hier vorne gibt es auch noch einige freie Plätze. Reihe 2, 3, 4. So. Ja, vielleicht können wir die Lautstärke noch ein bisschen runterfahren, damit Barbara Pöschel-Edrich die Harfe erklingen lassen kann. Vielen Dank.
Good evening, and welcome to the Saturday night program of the International Munich Peace Conference. My name is Julian Mühlfellner, and I will be giving a brief introduction on behalf of the organizers of this event before I hand off to our host, Johannes Zang. Quick disclaimer for the German speakers among you. Das ganze Programm heute Abend findet auf Englisch statt. Wenn Sie dem Programm lieber auf Deutsch folgen würden, holen Sie sich gerne ein paar Kopfhörer. Darüber wird eine deutsche Übersetzung des Programms zu hören sein. So, back to English. A couple things I need to say up front. This event is being recorded and live streamed. If you do not wish to appear on camera, please let us know. In the lobby, you can get water, tea, and coffee for free. Thank you so much for purchasing a ticket. It helps cover the costs we've incurred, but please consider donating as well. I cannot stress enough how massive our projected deficit will be if we do not receive enough donations. You could say we're financially irresponsible, but I like to think we're just very committed to the cause. Okay, thanks. I haven't got that much time. We want to apologize for the chaos involving online tickets. We got hit with what must be described as a hacker attack. Yeah, I'm glad so many people made it. If somebody didn't make it and is watching from home, sorry. And now I just want to make a quick point about why I think it's important that we are here today. Last week, I invited a friend to come to this event. I told her that I would be making a brief appearance on stage, and I assumed that this would be enough to make her want to attend, because it's always refreshing to see someone you know making a fool of themselves on stage. But instead, she sent me a voice message expressing uncertainty about whether she should attend at all. She explained that she thinks that what's happening in Gaza is horrendous, and that she totally disapproves of the Netanyahu government and how it's handling the war. However, she said that she was afraid of attending because she might be put into a box with people who support Hamas. I called her back and told her that not only did I think that she should come to the event, but also that I was going to talk about her privately voiced concerns on stage. And to her great credit, she said she was going to consider coming and that she had no problem with me talking about our interaction on stage. So I thought about what she said, and I realized that she was right. It is extremely uncomfortable to engage with this topic in public, especially as a German citizen, as a descendant of the people who perpetrated the worst atrocity in human history, the Holocaust. It is extremely uncomfortable to publicly criticize or condemn the actions of those who claim to act in the name and in the interest of the descendants of the victims of the Holocaust. But I will tell you what else makes me extremely uncomfortable. And that is being a German citizen while the German government is fueling armed conflicts, war crimes, and crimes against humanity all over the world with arms exports, as well as financial and diplomatic aid. That is not just happening in Gaza or the West Bank. In Sudan, there's every indication that a genocide is being perpetrated right now by a militia called the Rapid Support Forces. The EU, with German involvement, helped enable this genocide by legitimizing and funding the Rapid Support Forces several years ago for the purpose of forcibly stopping refugees from reaching Europe. They did this despite knowing that the Rapid Support Forces emerged from the Janjaweed militia, who were responsible for the 2003 to 2005 Darfur genocide. But it just so happens that if you're trying to fight back against German complicity in war crimes all around the world, the most difficult case you will have to make, the hardest fight you will have to fight, is the fight to get the German government to take a determined stance against the crimes perpetrated by the Israeli government and the Israel Defense Forces in Gaza, in the West Bank and beyond. That is why I think it's so important that we're here today to hear about the evidence of these crimes, but also about how we can contribute to ending them and ameliorating the underlying conflict through the application of international law and the principles of non-violent conflict resolution. We are so happy to welcome Francesca Albanese and Dr. Gershon Baskin. We could hardly wish for two people better suited to address these issues. And that is why it is so important that we endure the discomfort and take the risk of being labeled a Hamas supporter, even when we are not, even when so many of us are committed pacifists who reject and condemn the use of military violence by anyone, anywhere. So, I am pleased to report that my friend, who was unsure whether she should come, decided to attend today. She's sitting in the audience tonight, probably feeling uncomfortable. Now I'm going to hand over to our host, Johannes Zang. Johannes is many things. He's a music teacher, he's a freelance journalist, and he's an author. He's traveled through Israel and Palestine extensively and knows more about the region and its people than most of us who don't live there could ever dream of knowing. Enjoy the program.
Good evening, dear friends of peace with justice. I feel honored to be the host and moderator of this evening discussion with Francesca Albanese and Gershon Baskin. I'm really looking forward to a hard but fair dialogue and discussion. Let me start with a quote. There is a tragic dimension to the present deadlock in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. All are aware, including the Israeli government, that the continuation of the impasse may well lead to an explosion in the West Bank and Gaza, where Palestinian frustration and despair are building up to a level of volatility endangering the stability of the entire region. Still, not a single Israeli minister is willing to confront Netanyahu's immobility and topple his government through resignation. The issue becomes particularly crucial as Israel's policies of procrastination, Aufschieberitis auf Deutsch, may eventually put the whole Middle East on fire. These words, uttered by Viktor Ziegelmann in the Palestine-Israel Journal in 1997, almost 30 years ago, in hindsight could be considered prophetic. By the way, this is the only common publication between Israelis and Palestinians. And Viktor Ziegelmann, the co-editor at that time, uttered this warning, and it was not the only warning. Please, dear audience, allow me to tell you my own journey with Israel-Palestine in a few minutes. This year marks exactly 40 years that I first traveled to Israel and Palestine. I landed on Tel Aviv in December 1985 without knowing anything about the conflict, without having read not even one book. After spending Christmas in Bethlehem, I headed down south to Kibbutz Be'eri, where I started picking oranges, pomelos, lemons, and grapefruit for about 3 months. I never imagined that I would hear that name, Be'eri, 38 years later on German TV or find it in German papers. Be'eri was in the so-called Gaza envelope, the place most severely hit by the Hamas massacre of October 7th, with about 130 fatalities. A few days after arriving in Be'eri, another volunteer asked me during dinner in the dining hall with very soft voice, "We are going to Gaza tomorrow. Would you like to come? Don't tell anybody. The kibbutz does not allow us to go there." The next day, we hitchhiked a few kilometers to a junction where we waited for an Arabic service, a collective taxi, to bring us to Gaza. Arriving there after a few minutes was a shock. I felt like going from the first world green kibbutz to a city in the third world. And I immediately felt something here goes wrong. Something here maybe goes terribly wrong. A week later, I traveled on my own to Gaza, and so I did until I left the kibbutz in April '86. I had visited refugee camps in Gaza, had spoken to Palestinians who had studied in East Germany, learned about the Nakba, the flight and expulsion of almost 800,000 Palestinians between 1947 and 1949. And I had a first glimpse, a first impression of the so-called military occupation Israel has imposed on the occupied territories since 1967, following the so-called Six-Day War. From 1999 until 2003, I worked in Bethlehem in the Christian private school Dar al-Kalima. I was sent by Dienste in Übersee, an organization run by the German Lutheran Church. During these 4 years, I experienced the Second Intifada, much more brutal than the first one, much bloodier, with a much higher death toll. These 4 years turned me into a political person. I started to write personal newsletters containing information German mainstream media did not provide. These letters, sent out almost monthly, reached hundreds of people and connected me to journalists and newspapers. My third stay in the so-called Holy Land was between 2005 and 2008 in East Jerusalem. I worked as a freelance journalist and an organ teacher of the Anglican Church. Being a journalist, I often attended press conferences of Israeli or Palestinian human rights or peace organizations. I remember conferences where I was the only German-speaking journalist, and others where I was the only journalist in the room. At that time, around 800 correspondents and journalists from the whole world lived between the river and the sea, mostly on the Israeli side. I published hundreds of articles and books about the daily life, the occupation, but also on peace initiatives. During these Jerusalem years, I met Dr. Gershon Baskin, who was co-director of IPCRI, the Israeli-Palestinian Center for Research and Information. That NGO often organized Wednesday afternoon conferences at a hotel in East Jerusalem with Israeli and Palestinian speakers, politicians, ex-politicians, journalists, historians, and other scholars. IPCRI invited me in 2006 to attend a conference in Antalya, Turkey, with 100 Israeli, 100 Palestinian, and 100 international peace activists. The conference, sponsored by the government of Finland, took place in a very nice hotel. In this particular hotel, it was the 81st gathering of Israelis and Palestinians. And I know of many more hotels in Turkey, Cyprus, Crete, and other countries where similar dialogue meetings between Israelis and Palestinians took place. At this conference, Palestinians and Israelis met who at home live only a few kilometers apart, but it was easier for IPCRI to fly them all out to Turkey than getting travel permits for Palestinians to travel into Israel or permission for Israelis to attend a conference in Bethlehem or Ramallah. Why have those probably hundreds of similar meetings not helped to pave the way to dialogue, peace, and reconciliation? Gershon, you once told me that around 120 groups, organizations, and initiatives between the river and the sea work exactly for that, for rapprochement, for understanding. Why were they not heard by their respective governments? Sahar Vardi, Professor Jeff Halper, and Jonathan Cook are three Israelis who did a lot of research on the arms and security industry in Israel. They all say 150,000 families in Israel depend on that industry. Therefore, there is no interest in ending the conflict. Instead, they want the conflict to continue in order to develop and test new weapons and surveillance technology. Just yesterday, I saw Anthony Löwenstein's documentary, Palestine Laboratory, on Al Jazeera. It's for free for everybody, which is a pure confirmation of the already mentioned opinion. Should we maybe pay more attention to this, to the industry of weapons, security systems, and surveillance technologies? That's one of the questions I brought along to Munich. Another question: is a Truth and Justice Commission similar to that in South Africa 30 years ago maybe necessary for Israelis and Palestinians to get one step closer to peace and reconciliation? Recently, I participated in various webinars with Israeli and Palestinian peace activists from Parent Circle Family Forum, Young Ambassadors of Peace, Breaking the Silence, Ir Amim, to just name a few of them. They all give me hope. They all need our support. My hope for this evening is that we are ready to listen to each other, that we are ready to learn from each other, and that at the end of this evening, we all have a clearer picture how we can support voices of truth, justice, peace, and reconciliation. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Signora Francesca Albanese was appointed the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories by the Human Rights Council at its 49th session and has taken up her function as of 1st of May 2022 as the first woman ever in this role. Signora Albanese is an affiliated scholar at the Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown University, as well as a senior advisor on migration and forced displacement for a think tank, ARDD. She has widely published on the legal situation in Israel and the State of Palestine, and regularly teaches and lectures on international law and forced displacement at universities in Europe and the Arab world. Probably you have followed the news in the German papers in the last couple of days, even before this conference. I just want to quote from Bild-Zeitung a couple of months ago, UN-Beauftragte mit übler Judenhetze. That was written in der Bild-Zeitung. Or Ralf Balke in der Jüdischen Allgemeinen vor 5 Tagen. It's a Jewish newspaper. I quote in German. Nun kann man durchaus das israelische Vorgehen kritisieren, aber mit solchen Topoi, die zum Teil nach dem ganz kleinen Einmaleins des Antisemitismus klingen und sich ebenso in rechtsextremen Milieus großer Popularität erfreuen, hat man sich eigentlich für ein akademisches Umfeld disqualifiziert. Da kann man sich ja gleich Beatrix von Storch oder Björn Höcke einladen. Sagt ein Historiker der Uni Leipzig. Umso mehr freue ich mich. I am even more pleased to welcome you, Francesca, that despite all these verbal attacks, you were ready to come to Munich and talk to us. The floor is yours.
Dankeschön. I think this is really the only word I know in Germany. So thank you very much. I understand that you do not agree with what was just read. And the thing is that I don't read this stuff, not just because it's in German, but I'm serious. And it's very, look, as an Italian, and we will unpack it later, I cannot tell you how much I've suffered. And I'm suffering with cramps in my stomach when I was told the first time that I'm an anti-Semite. Because in my country, people like my own family who raised me, being told anti-Semite is a scar. And not because of what people think, but for what anti-Semitism is. It is revolting, it is disgusting, and it's appalling that it still exists in this part of the world. And instead of dealing with it, instead of dealing with the root cause of anti-Semitism, people in this country, I don't think they're stupid. They perform stupidity. And avoid seeing the injustice today like 100 years ago. But we'll get there. I was rude. I should have said thank you for inviting me. Munich Peace Conference. And I'm also very pleased to continue this discussion after my remarks and Gershon's remarks. I'm very happy to be on a panel with Gershon Baskin, because I'm sure that in another language he has read pretty much the same things about me, so it's quite courageous to be sitting with someone who sees like the devil. So as we meet here tonight, the international legal order starts at the edge of a precipice. Palestine, Israel, whatever you like to call it, lies at the center of this collapse, both as a cause and as a consequence. And I would like to convey through these remarks 3 points. First, that peace premised solely on security is misguided, as evidenced by the situation in Palestine. Second, imperialism is today showing its true face, and we can see it. And it's necessary to see it, because only by seeing it we will be able to address it robustly and coherently. And third, that international law can serve as the antidote to these challenges and in the pursuit of an ethical peace, with all of us having a vital role to play in this pursuit. So let's start with why security alone, by premising peace upon security alone, is misguided. In a world that has become increasingly polarized, a peace conference like this one is more crucial than ever. Nonetheless, for many, the focus remains on a state-centric conception of security, with war at its center. A seemingly perpetual state of conflict that politics either actively pursues or fail to avert, as evidenced by the emphasis of the conference, the other conference that is going on. And it's taking this all the spotlight away from you. They call it security, but security for whom? Is it the security of all the people, all of us, or just a select few? Is it the security of states, or some states in particular, and their political and financial interests? And Palestine here is a case in point. Security has been used to justify the intentional, progressive, incremental destruction of a people as a whole. In Palestine, peace has become a meaningless word used to mask decades of low-intensity ethnic cleansing, annexation, apartheid, and racial discrimination. These policies have brutally accelerated over the past 15 months and will not stop unless and until they will be actively opposed. Israel has been emboldened, meanwhile, to violate international law with impunity for decades, while Palestinians have endured unimaginable suffering and injustice in their existential struggle to avoid permanent erasure. Over the last 30 years, peace has been a facade for these atrocities. And on my way on this conference, I took a note. Palestine exposes the fragility of peace when premised upon the security of some, at the expense of the rights of an entire people, often in the pursuit of unlawful goals. Right now, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, namely whatever of historical Palestine that didn't become Israel in 1948. So the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And this is what the territory that I'm mandated by the Human Rights Council as a special rapporteur to report on. Well, the situation there is catastrophic. The violence, displacement, and violations of international law continue unchecked. Every measure that's justified in the name of security has come at the expense of Palestinians' lives and dignity. In the last 15 months alone, 70% of Gaza has been turned to rubble. 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed by Israeli bombs, artillery, and snipers. I mean, in this part of the world, sometimes I think if I said 50,000 dogs, people would register more. 50,000 Palestinians do not register with many people in this part of the world. And this number doesn't capture the many still undiscovered under the rubble and the many others who have died or will die due to the lack of medical treatment, hygiene, and adequate sustenance, or in Israeli jails. Because you know that there are no more universities, the health system has been completely decimated because it's been bombed or has been destroyed or has been raided. Even when you have the buildings still standing, the Israeli soldiers have made sure to destroy every machinery that the people in Gaza had. With the ceasefire, we need to ask ourselves, is what we see in Gaza can really be called a premise to peace? Because since the beginning of the ceasefire, over 300 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza alone. Only 1/3 of the agreed upon aid has been allowed to enter Gaza, 10% of the tents, and no mobile homes. So the Palestinians are still roaming around among the rubble and the waste and the bodies left to rotten, etc., and unexploded ordnance. The scale of the crime is known to all of us and has been known to all diplomacies in the world, including Germany, for a long time. At any other moment, though, all this would have raised alarm and international condemnation. Today, as I said, it doesn't register with us. Palestinian remains invisible. For years, the rallying cry in international diplomacy regarding Palestine has been negotiate peace. And yet, the approaches taken often reflect international decisions rather than mere ignorance or hypocrisy. For 30 years, the dominant strategy has involved endless negotiations, often framed around economic development, or treating the situation as a perpetual crisis, often a humanitarian crisis to manage instead of a political disaster to resolve in line with international law. Meanwhile, the land, resources, dreams, and aspirations of an entire people living under military rule, no matter the limits of autonomy granted by the occupation to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, or to what it was, the de facto authority, still the de facto authority in Gaza, Hamas, this notwithstanding. But mind you, not the security of the Israeli people. When everything has been sacrificed in the name of Israel's security. But mind you, not the security of the Israeli people in the land taken from the non-Jewish people of Palestine 75 years ago, which we now call Palestinians, and which constitute modern-day Israel, which is a protected member of the United Nations. Little that remains to the Palestinians rather than security of its never satiated annexation plans, in the little that remains to the Palestinians to exercise what is international consensus has agreed to be the territorial unity over which the Palestinians have an exclusive right to exercise self-determination in the form of an independent statehood. Indeed, the policies promoted in the occupied Palestinian territory have sidelined any form of reckoning on the imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians. And you can call it conflict, but you will be misled if you don't if you don't fully understand that this is not a conflict between two parties. And the relationship is a very asymmetric one. It's between the occupying power and the occupied, between the colonizer and the colonized, because and it's not ideological what I'm saying. Advancing control over the land, taking the resources that are recognized as the right to be enjoyed by another people is the hallmark of settler colonialism. So if Israel doesn't want to be pointed out as a settler colonial state, it should not behave as a settler colonial state in 2025. So, despite this asymmetry, which has been conveniently disregarded by the international community, Palestinians have been expected to negotiate the de facto conditions of their occupation, forced to drawing the lines of their own cell, as someone has said, while also coping with the low intensity and high intensity violence, apartheid, and racial discrimination that have emanated from Israel's settler colonial project. And today, after 16 months of genocidal assault on Gaza, which is leaking out into the West Bank, peace in the Holy Land, even a simple absence of conflict, appears even more fragile due to the depraved plans of the US presidency, which amplify the criminal agenda of Netanyahu's government. While this is shocking, it is not surprising, and this is the essence of imperialism. When confronted with the deliberate human-made catastrophe in Gaza, the discussion regarding the possibility that this might constitute genocide remains a contested one, particularly in what we call the West. At most, we see broad recognition that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, which are horrible things to do anyway. But such framings that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Palestinians reflect, this is not new, and this reflects no more than what Palestinians have endured for decades before the current escalation. So let me pause for a second and explain what is genocide. Because especially in this country, like in my own country, and trust me, while somewhat you have wrongly, but you have processed what you have done, the Italians have lived with it. And indeed, this is why probably this has also facilitated the resurgence of right-wing forces. And no, because you have that too, not only, so the problem is the same. So genocide is, what constitutes genocide is not defined by personal opinions, nor by personal histories, no matter, and regardless of how painful and horrific they are. What constitutes genocide is defined by the international law. And it comes as a surprise to many in our part of the world that you can have genocide even if you don't have crematoria. And you can have genocide even if you don't have extermination, because in fact genocide is, according to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, genocide is a series of acts that include killing, infliction of severe bodily or mental harm, creation of conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction, the physical destruction of the group in total or in part, or transfer of children and prevention of birth. So as you see, 1 out of 5 acts includes killing. And we'll come back to this. But what characterizes these acts as genocidal is the intent, what is called the mens rea. So the intention to destroy in whole or in part a group as such, a national, religious, ethnic, or racial group. And this is the thing, it's not complicated to identify the genocidal intent when it's so obvious and it's so direct. It's complicated to find intent because normally people don't go around inciting to commit genocide. And in 2025, you would expect that someone wouldn't create an online accessible archive with documenting genocidal statements and genocidal acts. But like many genocidal society, what the Israeli society, and I'm sorry to say that, but because there are so many Israelis who don't want this, so many Israelis who are against this, so many Israelis who are horrified because they stand firmly against occupation, apartheid, and genocide. The majority of the Israeli society have called for the erasure of Gaza and have sustained a genocidal call, which is the destruction of a people as such. And you know, for the Palestinians, like for many indigenous people, the concept of the land is critical. This is why I'm saying it's not about killing them all. We have not killed them all. It doesn't matter. What you have done is enough. And might nonetheless lead to the death of many more. Because 50,000 people have been killed, but 200,000, according to the most authoritative medical journal in the world, The Lancet, might have died because of lack of access to a healthcare system. So those who had leukemia, cancer, or other curable diseases have died. Or think of the women who couldn't who couldn't deliver in hospitals, or think of the others who have gotten sick, or the malnourished kids and elderly. However, the question is that the reason why we do not understand genocide, what genocide is because of what many of us call colonial amnesia. I mean, your country has committed 2 genocides in the span of 30 years. And is, of course, the Jewish people, the Roma and Sinti. There were many others who have been killed, who have been exterminated, because they didn't conform to the idea of the superior race. And as my dear friend Raz Sigal, who's a very, very important Israeli scholar, genocide scholar, so not Israeli, he's also Israeli, but doesn't matter, he's a genocide scholar. And he says, unfortunately, the idea of the superior race didn't die with Israel. And what I know is that it was not even conceived by Israel. This is something that we, Western society, need to deal with. 500 years of colonialism have left a huge, huge mark in our DNA. Racist we were, racist we are. And if we don't see that, if we don't see that, the horrors of the past will not be a memory anymore. And this is my deepest fear. In this case, it is not just, in the case of Palestine, it's not just that genocide has been overlooked. Genocide has been justified, enabling Israel to continue it. And third states have evaded their responsibility under the Genocide Convention. And in this case, Germany is the valedictorian. Not even the case brought by Nicaragua at the ICJ against Germany has led to a review of its policies vis-à-vis Israel. You know, I think that ultimately the problem that we have in understanding the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians and the current genocide is that we do not easily understand what self-determination is. It's a very convoluted concept in our mind, but self-determination is very simple, in fact. It's the right of a people to exist as a people, to determine themselves freely, not to be erased from a land, in fact, to enjoy the resources that land has. And it doesn't mean that self-determination has to manifest or to be realized necessarily as independent statehood. I mean, self-determination in international law was first and foremost protected as minority rights, so that minorities were not erased, but protected as different from the majority, but still having rights in the land where they were, to determine themselves according to their religion, tradition, etc. So if we fail to recognize the fact that the Palestinians are still struggling for their existence as a free people under Israeli rule, clearly we cannot understand this genocide, because we have not seen what has happened during the 30 years of the negotiation. As they were negotiating, Israel has continued to build colonies. The colonies have tripled during the so-called peace process. And the genocide we witness today is a direct consequence, unfortunately, of this long trajectory of the Israeli colonial project in Palestine. The amnesia I was referring to surrounding European colonial history, and which has led to the political shape and demographic whiteness of most of the current liberal democracies, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and it was South Africa, have forgotten what they've done in terms of, as settler colonial powers in Latin America, Namibia, to the Aboriginal people in Australia, or the natives, the indigenous people, the Métis, the Inuit, the First Nations in North America. This denial is not accidental. The invisibility of past colonial victims is functional in sustaining current forms of colonialism and imperialism. And this is why Palestine today lays at the crossroad, at this intersection. Palestine, after being Israel's laboratory for decades, in the words of investigative journalist Anthony Lowenstein, that was already mentioned, and by the way, he has written a fantastic book, Laboratory Palestine, and there are four podcasts and a two-part documentary, which is brilliant, and I really recommend it to everyone. It serves as a litmus test for examining these global infrastructures and interest. In the face of the devastation inflicted upon the land and its people in the occupied Palestinian territory, a minority of powerful states like Germany, on whose soil we stand today, have shockingly provided military, economic and political support to Israel in the commission of its atrocities. Such actions reveal the scale of our collective struggle. Palestine highlights how colonial violence is not an instance of the past and it's enduring, and intertwines. When I say imperialism, capitalism, is because, again, I know it might sound complicated, but look at the exploitation of natural resources, the role of arms proliferation, surveillance, technology, fossil fuel extraction in perpetuating and sustaining the domination of other people. This is the essence of empire. And we are so unused to think in these terms that we don't see it, even when it rises and becomes brutal, even when it shows its teeth, as it's happening these days, United States. Palestine highlights how colonial violence intertwines with capitalism, especially through the exploitation of this. Sorry, I read it already. The conjecture has not been missed by many in the younger generation struggling for environmental justice, who see Palestine as central to their own struggle. And here's the last point I wanted to raise. Such a sad state of affairs but must not deter us from seeking change from those who have the influence to act decisively. International law should be the cure to these horrors. International law and the mechanism to ensure enforcement and accountability do exist. But they, and this is the bad news, depend on they depend on political will to defend and use them. And if politicians do not do what is necessary, it is the role of responsible citizens, civil society, academics, students, young people, journalists, anyone from all walks of life who have not sat idle in the face, who do not want to sit idle in the face of this grotesque injustice, to act as the antibody within a healthy rule of law system. International law says that in the face of an injustice, of an illegal act or a series of illegal acts, the responsibility of a state like Germany or a state like my own is not to recognize the illegal situation, not to recognize as legal the consequences of the illegal act. So, for example, the occupation has been declared illegal. We all knew. I mean, my predecessor and his predecessor, all special rapporteurs have pointed to Israel since 2005 as committing apartheid, but no one noticed. And practicing settler colonialism and maintaining an illegal occupation. Little by little, we have become more accurate, and Israeli human rights organizations have joined Palestinian human rights organizations in documenting it. Apartheid, and even now genocide, and still the world doesn't move. In the face of this, but again, now we have the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, that says the occupation is unlawful. Not because it commits violation of international law here and there, but because the very presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, so the West Bank, the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, is to be dismantled because it violates the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. It precludes them the opportunity to live free as a people. And it amounts to apartheid and, racial discrimination and apartheid, and leads to annexation, which is a form of aggression. So you see, it's a collection, it's a potpourri of crimes, in the face of which a state should not aid and assist. And so cattle ties that might lead to detrimental effects. So political ties have to be reviewed, economic ties, no trading with a state that commits illegal acts, and instead, everything has continued business as usual. The first settlement itself should have, in 1967, should have been the trigger to change relations with Israel, and instead it has been tolerated, and impunity has become the rule instead of the exception. And today, yes, I'm done. And today, Israel has committed and continues to commit genocide, despite what the German Chancellor thinks. The ICJ has affirmed, this is key. I do not expect any politician in this country to agree with me or with Amnesty International or with Israeli historians who have courageously pointed, and at great cost and suffering for them, to the fact that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. They do not have to believe us. But the International Court of Justice in January 2024 has recognized the plausible risk of genocide, and in another case, Nicaragua versus Germany, has reminded all states of their duty to ensure that weapons they export are not used to commit violations of international law, including genocide and war crimes. Your state cannot say that it didn't know what it was doing. And let me skip it. Today, we have to speak accurately and coherently in calling this what it is: a genocide, an unlawful occupation, apartheid, and act accordingly. Hope is a discipline, and it's a discipline that we must practice together. And the way forward to resolve the question, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with international law, is to end the genocide and the occupation and the apartheid. And I would close by saying, let it be justice for everyone.
Here or there?
I won't have time for Q&A. Sorry? Say it again? Okay.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for your clear and precise words. We have 20 minutes for discussion. Please shorten your question to 1 minute, 60 seconds, not longer, please. You can ask in German or in English. There are 2 persons moving around with microphones. Please. Hier vorne ist eine Handmeldung. Ganz vorne, zweite Reihe. Ganz hinten sehe ich auch Julian. Ganz hinten meldet sich auch jemand. Ja, ja. Bitte.
Thank you, Francesca. I'd like to ask you about genocide being actually baked into the foundation of the Zionist race state. Basically, we know that establishing a supremacist race state on top of it, the expense of Palestine, could only be done via ethnic cleansing or genocide. It started with ethnic cleansing, but genocide was always in the cards. I do not see actually how it could not have turned out in that way, unfortunately. And I would like your opinion on that. And also the fact that the people of Gaza, the story of Gaza did not start in 67, but rather in 48 during the establishment of the Zionist race state.
Shall we take 3 questions and then I answer?
Okay. Ganz
So
hinten
I
die
can
Dame.
accidentally forget one of the questions.
Hello. Hi, Francesca. It's really nice to receive you in Germany. I'm from the Democracy in Europe movement and the political party Mera 25. We're running in the elections. The reason I wanted to first introduce that is because we've been facing a lot of state repression from Germany, and you have yourself faced 2 cancellations here. And the last whole year has seen a complete dismantling of fundamental rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of movement, a lot of deportations. And my question is basically to ask you, what means do we have to hold Germany accountable at the Human Rights Council? I know about the Universal Periodic Review, but is there also other instruments that we as civil society can take to basically bring Germany to some accountability? And I say this because we have personally faced like a lot of cancellations of our events. We have faced political repression, and this is something that was unimaginable a year ago. Yeah, so would just be interested to know what is out there that we can do.
Ja. Dankeschön. Und wir nehmen noch die letzte Frage hinten. Ja, die Dame.
Hello, ich bin Tabitha Elkins. So I think I'll say this in English. Thank you for coming. It seems like the framing of this situation in Israel and Gaza follows either 2 narratives, and Netanyahu is always being seen as representing Israel, although he is one of the most unpopular leaders in the history of Israel. We also see the erasure of the peace movement and the Israelis who have been fighting against Netanyahu. We also see this false dilemma: either you're on the side of Hamas and terror, or you're on the side of imperialism and the settlers. How can we change the narrative so that we are given more than these 2 extreme visions? How can we change the narrative so that we can focus on the peace movement? And there are people like Combatants for Peace who are working towards peace. Peace activists were murdered on October 7th. Like, I'm thinking of Vivian Silver, people like this. How can we change the narrative away from seeing violence and murder and genocide and oppression being without alternative, and how can we change the narrative so that we can see solutions and communication instead of just keeping up this dehumanization of either one side or the other side?
Thank you.
Okay. Gershon, I hope you don't mind taking in your Q&A also part of the questions that I will inevitably leave unanswered, because I'm not an expert either on Zionism or the reality inside Israel, but I will share nonetheless what I know. Because before being a special rapporteur, for example, on the first question on whether genocide is quintessential and was foreseeable since the arrival of Zionism in Palestine. Again, I think that there are persons who are more qualified than me to answer that question. However, what we know from history is that settler colonialism, which is the taking of a people's land, displacing them, and this is what settler colonialism is, and displacing them and taking their resources is something, this is the hallmark of settler colonialism, and in a number of cases, settler colonialism has led to genocide. I mean, there is scholarship that also points to the fact that Israel settler colonialism is not like any other because of the link between the Jewish people and the land of historical Palestine. And that is fine, and that is fine. And I think it would have been not as problematic as it has been, because it has not been problematic in history, if all Jewish people who needed a safe haven, who needed refuge, because they were brutally persecuted in Europe, and not just during the period of the final solution. I mean, we often forget that the Holocaust didn't happen just in the concentration camp and in the crematoria. And then again, this is also something that I've revisited and I've studied better these past months. How many Jewish people were killed in the ghettos because they were left without adequate hygiene, food, and medication? They were starved to death in concentration camps. So also, let me take an opportunity to say something, because again, as Germans, you have this attitude to say, we did it, and you did it. There is no question, please, as us, Italians, we did. And it's precisely and exactly because we did it that we need to feel ashamed, that we need to be alerted every time there is a risk that it happens to someone else. But let alone the Palestinians now. Do we see the racism that our cities and our countries are harboring against anyone? And now, while we focus on anti-Semitism as criticism of the state of Israel, and police officers around Europe beat up students who are just there, standing against please, let me finish. I know that this is a friendly crowd, but we have important things to discuss. And I really want you to listen to me, because even you are not doing enough. And I'm serious. Because again, even if I'm only talking to that person who didn't want to come here because she was scared of being associated with Hamas. But in 16 months, why didn't you take a book and read a thing about Hamas? And not because I'm defending Hamas, but because if you knew what Hamas was, and Gershon, I really need you to talk about that. Because if I do, this will be, hey, you see, she's an Hamas defender, she's an anti-Semite, she's justified. I've not justified once the crimes that were committed against Israeli civilians. Once. I've always condemned them. Because as a lawyer, as a human rights lawyer, I stand against any kind of violence against civilians. At the same time, what I've been wondering, not on October 7, 2023, because I was shocked like you. But shocked beyond word could say. I've been asking myself how I'm going to talk about this anymore after all this violence. I didn't know. The only thing I've said as soon as I had a microphone in front of me was, what has happened is horrible, and I condemn all forms of violence that has been used against Israeli civilians. And this is the moment for the international community to pause and act with wisdom toward the Israelis and the Palestinians. Instead, what has been done, and this is why I say the war mentality is very dangerous. Everyone has gone to Israel saying, we stand behind you. Go, whatever you like. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I said something very important. Because here, either we see where is the danger. The danger, and here I have to say more than in other countries. In the last 10 days, I've been to Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. And the lack of courage that I sense in this country is very disappointing. Do you understand that the Holocaust was possible because the majority of us zipped their mouth and didn't do anything to prevent the normal individual, normal human being? Were closed in ghettos and concentration camps? So this is what you have to ask yourself today. What am I doing to stop this? And there is no space for cowardice today. And when you watch Schindler's List, don't recognize yourself in Schindler unless you do something against it. So back to Zionism. Look, when you read the founding fathers of Israel, Jabotinsky, Herzl, Ben-Gurion, and I'm sure here there is someone who has read more than me. They talked about colonialism, and colonialism is ugly. So it's not me inventing things. It's not the anthropologists who have described Israel as a settler colonial endeavor. So accept it. The Jewish people didn't, in the mind of the founding fathers of Israel, the Jewish people didn't have to go as refugees or as migrants, but taking the land and kicking out the Palestinians, the non-Jewish people of Palestine. And it has happened. In this sense, genocide, yes, has been the dormant gene of that project. And I wish we had intervened sooner. But what I want to say today is that what I hope is that this is really the last genocide of human history. And it will not be if we don't understand what genocide is and what are the obligations of a state. And when they are violated, and let me skip the second question because I want to go to the no, it's the second question. What we can do? First of all, educate ourselves. There are plenty of books. You don't want to read the Palestinians because they are too pro-Palestinians? Fine. Read Israeli scholars. Now it's fine. It's quite well known what has happened there are plenty of movies, of documentaries, of what happened 8 years ago and what happens today. Document yourself and then educate your neighbor. And stand still in the face of denialism, in the face of obscurantism. You asked me, how do you feel that you have been cancelled by German university? I will relax. I've had 15 conferences in the last 10 days. I'm fine. The problem is yours. Because you live in a country that, again, where people are not stupid, but where people perform stupidity and look to me as your neighbor who took part in that with you, people look coward to me in this country. I'm sorry, but it's better. Among friends, I take the luxury of being brutally honest. So what can be done next? Speak out. Speak out and defend the defenders. Here, let's say the pro-justice, pro-human rights movement has been left pretty much alone. And it does include Palestinian people, ethnic German, Caucasian Germany. Is it okay to say that? Jewish people, Israelis who have moved to this country and have been strongly repressed and also been lectured about what it means to be anti-Semitic. So again, this is very, very dangerous. And then, this is my favorite one, courts, tribunals, lawyers. This is the thing. This is a phase in which we have the standards, we have the norms, we have the law enforcement mechanisms, and when law enforcement doesn't work, what do? You go to court. And in other countries, the government is being sued by NGOs, civil society. People are redirecting, reorganizing their resources. Denmark, the UK, and the Netherlands now have cases for their state's responsibility in the crimes that Israel has committed in Gaza. And again, and it's not just them. I'm currently looking at it's a monstrosity. It's really, I don't know where to end. I'm looking at the private sector, how military companies, the surveillance companies, AI, the tech industry is incredibly connected to that. But even the medical sector, pharmaceutical sector, and charities. You know how many charities sell in Western capitals the land of the Palestinians in the West Bank? And then, of course, banks, supply chains, pension funds. Pension funds are the most horrible because this is the savings that would go to people in this part of the world. Pension funds invest in the occupied Palestinian territory. So all these actors have to be held accountable. And how to change the narrative? Again, I have no way to comment. Really no authority to comment on the reality in Israel. Gershon will be better placed than I do. But I want to say something because I really think that this is part of the problem. The sort of partisanism that exists, including in the pro-justice field. One thing is true. one way or another, and we can be judgmental, but I would suggest not. For the Israelis, October 7 has been something that it's a violence and a pain that will never end and will hardly heal. And you, like me, might have the normal reaction, yeah, but what about the Palestinians? They don't see this way, because this is also a people who has been, in my view, and I say that respectfully, but indoctrinated to an ideology that has turned into a political doctrine. And therefore, I recommend everyone to be as inclusive as possible. Because especially as people who have no flesh and bones into this story, I'm Italian, I'm neither Palestinian nor Israeli, so I see my role as a bridge. And this is why I think people really don't want that I'm listened to. Because when we say solidarity is the political declination of love, this is something that scares people. This is a space that doesn't allow solidarity. This doesn't allow peace. It's just endless war. I don't want this to continue, and I hope you neither.
Two more questions? Yeah.
Sorry. I was about to go.
Looking at the watch, we can accept 2 more questions. Please be very short, and please keep in mind we have a final discussion at the very end, so you might be able to ask your question. 2 more questions. The gentleman here in the middle, and another gentleman 3 rows behind. And then we have music, and then we go into the coffee break.
Hello. I really need to go back to the second question that was asked about what we can do here. You talked about some legal things that we can do, other political pressure. What's your feeling about the BDS movement?
Feeling is a nice way to put it. I hope you don't mind, I'll give a legal assessment.
And then the other question, ja, der Herr 3 Reihen weiter etwa. Ja, ja. Oh, sorry.
Signora Albanese, thank you very much for being here and being the voice of justice for everybody, especially the politicians. And excuse please the behavior of my former alma mater, Ludwig Maximilian University. Right now we have a ceasefire, thank God, but we also see violations of these agreements, especially West Jordan land, and Israel keeps on bombing other areas that they see fit. Do you think the ceasefire will hold, or is this another strategy to continue this war?
BDS, for those who don't know it, is a largely Palestinian-led movement aiming to boycott, calling for a boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel, and is a movement that started after the political inaction, after the ICJ advisory opinion declaring the illegality of the wall, and so that the wall should be dismantled. Nothing happened. And because of that, Palestinian civil society and others have joined, I've created this movement, which is very active, and it's causing, as far as the dissent, quite significant economic damage to Israel by putting pressure on various actors, including political actors, so that they do not buy from and sell to the occupation. I think it's quite natural that ordinary citizens disgruntled with the current state of affairs, resort to boycott, as it was. Look, in South Africa, it was not different. It's not that apartheid collapsed because member states started taking action. If they were the last ones, because the first one, for years, where citizens like you and I mean, not I, I mean, now couldn't do anything like that, but if I was not a special rapporteur, I would engage in this, because it's just ordinary citizenship, ordinary citizens' work. You choose whom to vote and whom not to vote, including by buying, actually, very much by buying or not buying. And so, I mean, I think it's fine. I mean, special rapporteurs have a very, very clear position on the BDS, defending it as a form of freedom of expression and freedom of association. And while being criminalized in a number of jurisdictions, when taken to court, BDS wins. And the most important part for me of the BDS is that actually the most important parts, without dismissing the first one, is the second, divestment. Private and public actors must divest from the occupation, and not as a moral act, not as an act of charity, but as a legal obligation, because aiding and assisting, including collaborating with an unlawful endeavor, is prohibited under international law and leads to consequences. This is why I was mentioning courts, because the consequences should be there both for the government, and some of the crimes that Israel has committed entail criminal liability, so individuals can be held accountable, as you can see from the ICC, which is finally indicted two Israeli leaders, and I hope that many others will, because I'm really shocked that there is no indictment for the architects of the extended colonization, even after that in 2023, the current government coalition announced as a policy, as a government policy, the annexation of large swaths of the West Bank. And the ceasefire. No, you said you expressed regrets for your alma mater's position. Did you write to your alma mater? Did you make your voice heard? You see? So thank you for the regrets, but thank you. No, we really don't get it. We really don't get it, what action means, because we are privileged and we are lazy, and many of us have never had to struggle for anything. And we will miss human rights very much when we will not have them anymore, and it will be too late. Ceasefire. Ceasefire. I guess a number of Palestinians are asking, which ceasefire? Because let me say something that I should have said before, but while the fire is not ceased in Gaza, but at the same time it has allowed the people to breathe, to go back to their homes, the Israelis, some Israeli hostages to return, and some Palestinian hostages to also return. Because, excuse me, the children detained by an unlawful occupation, we should really not call them detainees. So they have been held by an unlawful occupation. Of course, there were Palestinians who have committed crimes. Of course. And we should really distinguish, according to international law, what crimes are international crimes, because attacking a soldier in occupied territory is not necessary. It's a tragedy, but it's not a crime. Because as a state has the right to defend itself when attacked, so have the people the right to resist when attacked, and again. I'm just saying that because this is international law, because the right to life is not an absolute right. And when you embark on like combat actions, if you are a resistant or if you are a soldier, and you are killed in combat, this is a tragedy, but this is not a crime. However, in the context of the ceasefire, Israel has intensified the apocalyptic violence that it has used against the Palestinians in the West Bank. Because in the while in 12 months, from October 2023 to October 24, 700 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. 10,000 have been arrested and detained, most of them without charge or trial, including children. 600 children, in the last 20 years, an average of 600 children per year, until 2023, then the number went up, have been detained. Many of them, 40% of them, up to an average of 30 days in solitary confinement. This is brutal. And then you say, why the Palestinians don't automatically love the Israelis? I'm not justifying that. I'm just saying, well, the occupation is ugly and generates resistance. So the best way that Israel has to protect its citizens is to get out of the occupied Palestinian territory and leave a possibility to the Palestinians to live. And so the ceasefire has brought more violence and havoc on the West Bank, because the same practices that we have seen in Gaza are now being replicated in the occupied Palestinian territory. The destruction, the destruction of the refugee camps, the forced displacement, entire cities have been bombed by airplanes and artillery on the ground. And there is only one thing that explains what is happening to the West Bank. Destruction, intentional destruction, so that the people cannot live there. So that member states will be, like my own government, will be able to say, but look at Gaza, it's destroyed, it cannot be a state anymore, and the same will happen with the West Bank. So this is why I'm saying the obligation in the face of genocide is not just to punish, it's to stop, and even before, to prevent it. So our member states, yours like mine, have already failed doing that.
Francesca, nochmal, thank you very, very, very much. And we are glad that you are still with us for further discussion later on. The music will give us some time to reflect on the homework you have given us. Und dann 15 Minuten Pause. And then we go into a 15 minutes break after the music.
Diskussion.
Test, Test. Bitte nehmen Sie Platz. Wir starten in 2 Minuten. Bitte nehmen Sie Platz. Dann haben wir mehr Zeit für die Diskussion ganz am Ende. So. So, liebes Publikum, nehmen Sie die Plätze ein, sonst verlieren wir wertvolle Gesprächszeit. Gershon, do you talk from here or from over there? Okay, yeah. So, wir starten. Bitte dämpfen Sie Ihre Stimmen. I would like to introduce Dr. Gershon Baskin to you. Gershon Gershon was born in the USA and came to Israel as a young man. He was the founder and co-director of IPCRI. I mentioned the NGO earlier on. And Gershon played a key role in getting Gilad Shalit after how many? 5 years?
5 years and 4 months.
5 years and 4 months out of Hamas captivity. He played a key role in getting him free. I dedicated a chapter, a text in my Gaza book, Gershon and his connections to Hamas. And let me just quote in German a few sentences. Überschrift: Warum brach ein langjähriger inoffizieller Kontakt zwischen einem Israeli und einem Hamas-Vertreter ab? Und der Text endet so: Nachdem Gershon diesen Razi Hamad im libanesischen Fernsehen bei einem Interview gesehen hatte, brach Gershon den Kontakt ab, nachdem Hamad gesagt hatte, er rechtfertige den Terrorangriff vom 7. Oktober und, Zitat, versprach einige mehr bis zur Auslöschung Israels. Ende des Zitats. Andern Tags schrieb Baskin Razi Hamad nochmals. Baskin brach den Kontakt ab. Zitat, nach mehr als 17 Jahren Kontakt ist der Mann, den ich kannte, nicht derselbe, der nun sein Volk in Gaza im Stich gelassen hat und im Krieg offizieller Sprecher der Hamas ist. Ende des Zitats. Gershon hat mir vor einer Minute gesagt, Sie sind wieder in Kontakt und vielleicht wird er auch darüber ein wenig sprechen. Gershon is an expert of the Israeli peace camp. He's a peace activist himself, and I'm looking forward to your words. The floor is yours, Gershon.
Thank you very much, and thank the organizers for inviting me. I'll start with a confession. I'm not an anti-Semite, nor am I a self-hating Jew. I mention this because when it was known in the world that I was going to be appearing with Francesca, I was attacked of legitimizing anti-Semitism, which of course I don't. Anti-Semitism is illegitimate always, everywhere. Criticism of Israel and what Israel does is completely legitimate, always. There are some people who criticize Israel who are also anti-Semites, but most criticism of Israel is in the right place and needs to be said and needs to be acted on. There's very little of what Francesca said that I take issue with. I agree with almost everything that she said. Almost, here and there, a little piece. Nothing very important. But I'm not going to speak in the same direction that she did because unfortunately, perhaps like her, perhaps unlike her, I have zero confidence in international law and international institutions and the ability to make change based on doing the right thing. It is 100% true that if the international community acted on the basis of international law and the institutions of international law had the power to enforce the decisions they make, our reality would be very different. But that's not the case. We have seen repeatedly Security Council resolutions voted 14-1, with the one vetoing them. We've even seen Security Council resolutions that pass and nothing happens, let alone resolutions of the General Assembly or other institutions of international law, the ICJ. Maybe the ICC finally will be able to enforce warrants for the arrest of some of the people that they are putting those warrants out for. We're also seeing national law take hold in different countries in the world, trying to arrest Israelis who are accused of committing war crimes in Gaza, and we'll see how that plays out. But I believe very firmly from my personal experience and from the reality that we live in Israel and Palestine, that if there's going to be a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that will enable Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace with each other, it's going to come from within Israel and Palestine and in the region, and not in Brussels or New York or Geneva or anyone else around the world. It is our conflict, it is our responsibility to ensure that this war in Gaza is the last Israeli-Palestinian war. We cannot continue to do this. We've been killing each other for more than 100 years, and if there's anything that we need to learn from the past horrible 15 months, is that we can't keep doing it. When I got invited, I asked the organizers of this conference to bring with me my Palestinian colleague, who we often work together on a daily basis and share stages both in Israel and in Palestine and around the world, Samis and Jalawi. Unfortunately, there wasn't a possibility of doing that, so I'm going to take the liberty to some of my words speak in his words as well, as we share so much in common in our beliefs of what we're doing and what needs to be done. We start by saying that we have crossed moral red lines in this war that should never be crossed. On October 7th, Hamas committed war crimes, crimes against humanity that should never be done by anyone. And every day since October 7th, Israel has been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. We have taken the liberty to cross moral red lines that no human being and no people should be allowed to do, and it should not be tolerated. And there's no mincing the words here about the crimes that have been committed since October 7th by Hamas and since that day by Israel in Gaza. There's no question about the war crimes that have been committed, and the people who commit them need to be held responsible for those crimes that were committed. We need to recognize, if we're going to confront our reality and try to think about where we go, that for Jews around the world and for Israelis, October 7th was the worst trauma since the Holocaust. And it is a trauma that we have not yet left. Israelis are not living today on February 15th. Israelis say that they are in October 498. That's the date that we live in. Israelis have not left October 7th. We are reminded of it every single day in our media, in radio and television, in the print, in conversations between people. And since October 7th, the Palestinians are living, in my view, a bigger trauma than the Nakba. For Palestinians, what they have experienced in Gaza and in the West Bank, and I think it's pertinent for Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but for Palestinians that I meet all over the world, they are living through a trauma which is worse than 1948. And it affects our ability to think rationally and coherently, and to think about a positive direction that we can move in after the horrors that we've lived through. We aren't yet post-traumatic, these two people. We are still living the trauma every single day, and the trauma will continue to be with us. We won't begin to become post-traumatic until this war is over. And here's a few unfortunate realities. The war will not end as long as there remain Israeli hostages in Gaza. There are still 73 Israeli hostages in Gaza. The war will not end as long as Hamas is in control of Gaza. The war will probably not end as long as Benjamin Netanyahu is Prime Minister of Israel. The war will probably not end as long as Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the Palestinian Authority. The war may not end as long as Donald Trump is president of the United States. Now, these are all realities that could change. Hamas is changing. There are conversations amongst the Hamas leaders outside of Gaza on taking a new direction. These are serious talks. I can't give you any projections or any knowledge of what decisions that they are going to make, but they are 100% aware that as long as Hamas controls Gaza, not a dollar will enter Gaza for reconstruction. This the Hamas leadership recognizes. They know it. The thing is that at least since the beginning of the ceasefire, which was an agreement between Israel and Hamas, the same Hamas that Israel said they're going to destroy, the ceasefire agreement was between Israel and Hamas. A third-tier level of Hamas commanders have risen from the rubble and the dust and the tunnels and have taken command of Gaza. With $200, they can give out uniforms and guns to 16 and 17-year-olds who are part of the daily struggle of survival, people who are searching for food and water and shelter and have none of those, are easily recruited into the Hamas on the ground. And there is a division, a very worrying division developing between the Hamas leadership outside and the new young leadership of Hamas inside. None of the political leadership of Hamas that we knew before are in Gaza today. They're all either dead or outside of Gaza. And the military commanders, most of them are no longer alive either. There's a group of 3 or 4 people who were mid-level commanders before October 7th who are now running the show in Gaza. And because there is no alternative to Gaza, to Hamas in Gaza, the people of Gaza don't rise against Hamas. What everyone tells me, Gazans and Palestinians not from Gaza, is that Hamas is very unpopular in Gaza today. The people of Gaza don't want Hamas in power anymore. When I had a conversation with a good friend of mine in Gaza just 2 weeks ago of why aren't people rising up against Hamas if they're so against Hamas, they said, what's the alternative? Hamas executed people in the streets after the ceasefire was declared, shot others in their knees, to spread the message that you're not going to go against us, we're in power. And we've seen these shows that they put on the days of the exchanges of hostages when they released just this morning. It's a well-orchestrated show of power, of force, of people who mean business. Our leaders in Israel, the Palestinian leadership, and the Arab countries have ideas on the day after. No one is willing to discuss them seriously, certainly not the Israelis. Netanyahu wants to prolong this war as long as he can, even at the expense of sacrificing the hostages, because Netanyahu's political survival is based on continuing this war. As long as the war goes on, we don't head for new elections. As long as the war goes on, we don't create an independent judicial commission of inquiry of what brought us to October 7th, what happened on October 7th, and the dysfunctional nature of the Israeli government since October 7th. We have a built-in mechanism in Israel that prolongs the war. Now we have Donald Trump come along with his insane ideas of ethnic cleansing of Gaza and believing that he can force Jordan and Egypt to take in 2 million Palestinians. This is not real. This cannot happen. This will not happen. These are not pieces on a chessboard. These are people who are connected to a land, a heritage, a homeland, and they will not be moved. Even if there are Gazans who may want to leave Gaza, no one agrees to voluntarily leave their homeland. And the people of Palestine will not voluntarily agree to leave their homeland. Even if the people of Gaza are living homeless today, 2 million people who have no homes to go back to because they were destroyed, are willing to remain in Palestine and fight for their right to be in Palestine and will never give in to the will of Donald Trump, and no money in the world will buy their allegiance and willingness to leave their homeland. So where are we today? It's very clear that there are 2 things that came out of this war so far that put us on a possible course toward changing our reality for the positive. For one, and you might not agree with me that this is a positive thing, but I think it is, the 2-state solution is back on the table. For years before the war, I thought that the 2-state solution was no longer viable. But it's back on the table. And many people don't know this, but at the General Assembly last September, the Saudis, together with Norway, the European Union, and France, created a global alliance for the implementation of the 2-state solution. They have subsequently held meetings in Riyadh, in Brussels, in Oslo, and the next meeting is in Cairo this month. And there are 90 countries that are taking part in this global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. I think this is a really positive development. Of course, Israel is invited and Israel doesn't come. I have told the organizers that they need to make sure that there is a chair at the table with the sign Israel and an empty seat so that everyone knows that Israel is invited and they don't attend. This is a meeting which is aimed at getting countries like Germany to recognize their historic responsibility to recognize the state of Palestine. Isn't it about time? The Palestinian people are also victims of the Holocaust. Let's not forget that. But as my friend and colleague Samer says, even if 192 member states of the United Nations recognize the state of Palestine, that's not going to end the occupation. There is only one state's recognition of the state of Palestine that you need to end the occupation and allow Palestinians to live in freedom and dignity and security, and that's Israel. Samer, who speaks on all Israeli media, he learned Hebrew in prison. He went to prison when he was a 15-year-old kid for throwing stones during the first Intifada. Samer says, I speak to all you Israelis, from the right to the left. I'm on television, even on Channel 14, which makes Fox News look liberal. I don't go to Channel 14. Samer goes to Channel 14. Samer says, I know you Israelis better than you know yourselves because you don't talk to each other. I talk to all of you. And one thing that Samer says when he speaks to Israelis and to Palestinians is that we have a failed strategy. For 100 years, we Palestinians have had three leaders, Haj Aminu Husseini, Yasser Arafat, and Mahmoud Abbas. And all three of them have failed in their responsibility to their people to bring them to freedom, liberation, security, and dignity. All three leaders. And all three leaders have invested their time and energy in the same failed strategy. And here I think I'm going to take issue with Francesca, even though she's right. All the international pressure on the world will not change Israel's political position on the occupation. It doesn't work. The more you pressure Israel, the more hardline they become. The more you threaten Israel, the more you back them into a corner. As Samer says, and I think he's right, we Palestinians need to develop a strategy which understands that Israelis are not the enemy, they are the solution. What we need to do is address Israeli fear. Now, I know this sounds absurd asking the victims, the occupied, to understand the fear of the occupier. If we had international law working, Palestinians would not only be right and just in terms of their positions, they would also be smart. But because the international law and the international system doesn't work, it's not enough to be right. Yes, Palestinians have a right to resist. Palestinians have a right to an armed struggle against the occupier, not civilians, against the army. It's right. When a Palestinian kills an Israeli soldier in the occupied territories, it is not terrorism. Terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for achieving political goals. But it is not smart for the Palestinians to continue to support the armed struggle. It might be right, but it is not smart. It is a strategy that has failed them for 100 years. There is no military solution to this conflict, not from the Israeli side and not from the Palestinian side. There's no military solution. And the armed struggle only gets more Palestinians killed. There are no victors in this war in Gaza. I read the Hamas Telegram pages and the Islamic Jihad Telegram pages. They put out these lofty statements in beautiful Arabic every single day in which they claim victory. Show me the victory. There are only losers in this war. There is no total victory that Netanyahu talks about and lies about. And Hamas has brought death and destruction on the Palestinian people. And we all need to say, we Israelis and Palestinians need to all say, enough. It has to end. Even when this war is over, there will remain 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs living on the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. That fact is not going to change. We are almost equal numbers. There are a little few more Palestinians than there are Israeli Jews. Unfortunately, there is no one-state solution. It doesn't exist. And if anyone thinks that after October 7th, the idea of just putting everyone together in one happy state is the solution, then you're living in fantasy world. But the solution is also not a two-state solution which puts people in cages. There is no peace between Israel and Palestine which is based on walls and fences that prevent people from moving, because all the land between the river and the sea, all of Palestine, and all the land between the river and the sea, Eretz Israel, is important to all the Israelis and all the Palestinians who live there. I can tell you as a Jew, when we read the Torah, the stories that we are told in the Torah don't take place on the beaches of Tel Aviv. They take place in the hilltops and the valleys of Judea and Samaria. And when Palestinians who are living in Nablus, Tulkarm, Kalkilia, or Khalil think about Palestine, they're not just thinking about Ramallah and Khalil, they're thinking about Jaffa and Lid and Haifa and Akka. So how do we make this possible, where we understand that this is a shared homeland, where both people must have the right for self-determination? There's no other solution. We have been killing each other, willing to fight and die for more than 100 years for a territorial expression of our identity. We both claim that this land belongs to us. We both claim that we give our identity to this land, and we take our identity from this land. If you ever want to read two short mirror documents, read the Israeli Declaration of Independence and the Palestinian Declaration of Independence. The Israeli Declaration of Independence was authored mainly by Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. The Palestinian Declaration of Independence from November 15, 1988, was mostly authored by the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish. When you read these two documents, they are mirror images of each other. They each spell out, paragraph by paragraph, why each people claim the right to the land and the right to self-determination, the right to establish their state on the land. They both recognize that there are other people living in the land. Samer, when he speaks to Jews, he says, I'm a Muslim. I know my history. I cannot deny that the Jews were in the land of Israel. They have a connection to that land. But I want to remind you, Jews, you were never there alone. There were always others. And we're the others. This is the reality of the land. Rashid Khalidi, the professor from Columbia University, in his last book, The 100-Year War on Palestine, says it very eloquently. Rashid wrote, I, as a Palestinian, can never justify Zionism. I can never say that it was right, and I will never agree that Zionism had a legal or even a moral reason for existing. But I'm a realist. There are 7 million Israeli Jews in the land today. You want me to go on fighting against Zionism from 150 years ago? The reality is that there are 2 people living in this land, whether you like it or not. The only way we're going to stop killing each other is when we understand that every single person living between the river and the sea must have the same right to the same rights. That is the fundamental principle that will enable us to live in peace. Now let's deal once again with reality. There is no chance of peace with our current leadership. 0 chance. Not only that, in my estimation, 30% of Israeli Jews will say no to any peace treaty that's on the table, regardless of what it says. 30%, up to 30%. Up to 30% of Palestinians will say no to any peace treaty that's put on the table. That's the real picture. But the flip side of that is that there is a potential of 70% of Israeli Jews and 70% of Palestinian Arabs who could say yes. Where is our challenge? Our challenge is, first of all, we have a 30-year failed peace process. Promises that people believed would bring us peace and didn't. They brought us more suffering and more tragedy. But moreover, at least since the Second Intifada, at least since the year 2000, when I lecture to groups of young Israelis and young Palestinians or older people on both sides, I hear the same words from both peoples. They tell me, I want peace, but they don't. And I hear this from Israelis, and I hear it from Palestinians almost every day. And my answer to them is, you're right. The objective reality that we live verifies for Israelis and Palestinians that the other side doesn't want peace. Whether it be Israelis who are stealing more Palestinian lands and confiscating Palestinian land and building more settlements and settler violence and the army protecting them and Israeli impunity, or whether it be Israelis who see Palestinians committing acts of terror and being celebrated in cities and towns throughout the occupied territories. We get verification every single day that the other side doesn't want peace, and we have 0 leaders who even use the word peace. It's become a 4-letter word. We don't talk about it. In my mind, the key to breaking this cycle is to demonstrate partnership. It's when Israelis and Palestinians are willing to stand up together and say, I want to live in peace. I recognize your right as a people for your national right of self-determination. I recognize your right to have a decent life, to live in security, security in the broad sense, not just weapons, but to live in security, human security, of having shelter, of having food, of having a job. I recognize your rights for good education. When we can develop partnerships like this and focus them in the eyes of the public, we will begin to make a shift. We started to do that. I'm going to tell you a secret story that hasn't been published. Keep it secret. About 2.5 years ago, I approached former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, in 2008, when he was Prime Minister, held 42 negotiating meetings with Mahmoud Abbas. He raised a Palestinian flag along an Israeli flag on the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. He sent a motorcade to bring Mahmoud Abbas from Ramallah to Jerusalem, just like he was a head of state. And Olmert went further in his negotiations with Abbas than any other Israeli leader before him. But he didn't get to finish those negotiations because he got indicted and he was sent to jail on a minor corruption fee, and he served his time in prison. But I know that Olmert, who, by the way, when he was mayor of Jerusalem, he was mayor of Jerusalem for 10 years. When he used to appear in the Jerusalem theater before some event, my wife and I would scream boo at him. There wasn't anything that I agreed with him on, but this is a changed man. And I approached him 2.5 years ago and I said, Ehud, are you willing to try and close the gaps that existed between you and Mahmoud Abbas back in 2008? And on the spot, he said yes. I said to him, in my mind, you're not in power. Mahmoud Abbas has almost zero legitimacy, but what we're going to do is create a document, if they agree, that has historical purpose. It will be a benchmark when negotiations begin. It will change the narrative, that's the common narrative in Israel and around the world, that once again the Israelis offered everything to the Palestinians and they said no. Olmert says openly, Mahmoud Abbas never said no. He never said yes. It took me 3 months to convince Mahmoud Abbas to enter into the process, and he did. And he sent 2 representatives to negotiate with Olmert in his office in Tel Aviv. And in September 2023, they arrived at an agreement, and Abbas was in Amman in his house in Jordan, and 10 minutes before Olmert and I boarded the plane to fly to Amman to sign this document, I received a phone call from him, not from him, from his office, saying, don't come. Why? We didn't coordinate Olmert's visit with the Jordanians. Olmert travels with security, state-provided security. His security folks coordinated the visit with the Jordanians. The next day, Abbas said to me, tell Olmert to come to Ramallah to talk about the document. Olmert's response was, I'm not coming to talk about the document. We already did that. We haven't agreed a document. I'm coming to Ramallah to sign the document. And then October 7th happened. And even after October 7th, Ehud Olmert said, I'm willing to go to Ramallah to sign the document. And Abbas kept saying, tell him to come to Ramallah to talk about the document. I have a historic document in my hands, an agreement on a 2-state solution, on borders, on Jerusalem, on refugees, on security, on economy, on water, everything. And once again, Abbas wouldn't sign it. So I sat with Samer in his house in Sheikh Jarrah and said, what do we do with this document? Samer suggested, let's call Nasser al-Kidwa. Many of you probably don't know the name of Nasser al-Kidwa. Nasser was the PLO ambassador in the United Nations for 17 years. He also served for a period of time as Deputy Secretary General of the UN. He was a foreign minister in one of Mahmoud Abbas's governments. He was the president of the Yasser Arafat Foundation. He is the nephew of Yasser Arafat, Nasser's mother's Arafat's sister. Nasser put together a political list that aimed to run in the elections in May of 2021 that Mahmoud Abbas canceled. The list that Nasser al-Kidwa headed was a list of Fatah people who were opposed to Abbas. And it was supported by Marwan Barouti. Marwan's wife Fadwa was number 2 on Nasser's list. We're talking about a person with legitimacy. We're talking about a person who's known in the Palestinian world. We're talking about a person who believes in peace and nonviolence and believes in the 2-state solution. When we called Nasser, his first response was, I won't sign a document that Abbas wouldn't sign. So what then? I suggested to Nasser, you write a document. And he did. And we used Nasser's document to negotiate with Olmert. These 2 men had never met each other. Former Foreign Minister of Palestine, former Prime Minister of Israel. We brought them together in negotiations over Zoom. It took 2 months for us to agree on a paper. What Nasser said is, this is not an agreement. It's not a peace plan. It's a paper, a document of a proposal of how to end the war in Gaza, how to create credible governance in Gaza until Palestinians can go to elections, how to free the hostages and an agreed upon list and names of Palestinian prisoners, the two-state solution based on the 1967 borders with a 4.4 territorial swap of equal size from each territory, and with regard to Jerusalem, that all the Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem would be the capital of Palestine, all the Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem would be the capital of Israel, and the old city of Jerusalem, which is less than 1 square kilometer, would be put under international guardianship of 5 countries, of which Israel and Palestine would be 2. Internationalizing the holy places and the old city of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is bigger than Israel and Palestine, even though it's 1 square kilometer. This proposal we had was signed in July of 2024, and then we thought, what do we do with it? If we present it immediately to the Israeli and Palestinian publics, they won't relate to it. They'll say, these 2 guys, who are they? Former prime minister, went to prison. Former foreign minister who's living in exile. He was thrown out of Palestine by Abbas. What kind of legitimacy do these people have? Without looking at the content of the document. So we made a decision that we're going to present it around the world. And in 4 months, we met with 39 heads of state and foreign ministers, including in the region and in Europe. We drafted together a joint op-ed newspaper piece, translated into 15 languages, appeared in 33 of the leading newspapers of the world. This past week, we held our first Israeli-Palestinian gathering on the Olmert El-Qidwa paper, attended by 50 Israelis and 50 Palestinians in Cyprus, including people from Gaza who are not in Gaza now. It was an amazing meeting. I have in my career organized more than 2,000 Israeli-Palestinian conferences. This was one of the best Israeli-Palestinian meetings I've ever been to. At a time that you would expect to be so much mutual recrimination and hate and wants of revenge, we had 100 Israelis and Palestinians in a very intensive meeting talking to each other of how do we get out of this cycle that we're in? How do we move forward? How do we make the vision of Olmert and Al-Qidwa real? And the key to it is demonstrating this partnership. I hope that this past days, what we did is created 50 pairs of Israelis and Palestinians who are now willing to work together, to go out together, to speak together, to write together, to put on social media that they are working together for peace. I'm often called, Francesca told me, I'm often called a normalizer. I have no idea what that means because I've spent every day of my life working against the occupation and never normalizing the occupation. And all those people who talk about normalization when Israelis and Palestinians are working to end the occupation and create a Palestinian state are calling normalizers, we need to change the language. We need to change our ideas. We need now, and with this I'll conclude, we need now, us, Israelis and Palestinians, to get rid of our leaders. This is #1 issue on our agenda. Netanyahu is a criminal not only for what he's done in Gaza and in the West Bank. Netanyahu is a criminal against the Israeli people. I can tell you that after I successfully back-channeled negotiations that I started in 2006 with Hamas that led to the breakthrough that freed Gilad Shalit and 1,027 Palestinian prisoners, I used my credibility to talk to Abbas and Netanyahu about opening up a secret direct channel between them. And in 2012 and 2013, 3 times I brought offers from Mahmoud Abbas to negotiate in secret direct channels with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu said no. October 7th needs to be a wake-up call to the Israeli people that you cannot occupy another people for 56 years or lock 2.3 million people in a territory like Gaza with 80% poverty and expect to have quiet. There's no peace with occupation. There's no quiet with siege. This the Israeli people need to understand, and they need to know that Benjamin Netanyahu, since at least 2009, has developed a strategy to hold and divide the Palestinian leadership, to strengthen Hamas, to weaken the Palestinian Authority and to delegitimize them. And Netanyahu succeeded in letting the whole world believe that he wants peace because he made one speech in 2009 talking about a two-state solution at Bar-Ilan University. By the way, his father, Ben-Zion Netanyahu, was interviewed the following day on Israeli army radio, at which time he said, "I know my son, he didn't mean it." And of course he didn't. Netanyahu's strategy worked. It removed the issue of Palestine from the local agenda. We had 5 rounds of elections in Israel. No one talked about the single most crucial issue to the future of Jerusalem, the occupation and the Palestinian people. Didn't even mention it. And it was removed from the international agenda. Who talked about Palestine? Netanyahu has to go. Now, I don't have any great hopes of some new leader emerging in Israel. There is no one in our political arena who I think is the person who should lead us and can lead us to peace. But you know, before this war, we had 40 weeks of demonstrations against the judicial overthrow of our government by Netanyahu's government. And in 40 weeks of demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people, a whole new young leadership of civil society emerged. And on October 7th, when we had a dysfunctional government for months, it was the same civil society that enlisted itself and provided basic needs for human beings who were suffering as a result of October 7th. We have all kinds of new young leaders out there. Some of them we don't even know who they are, but they will emerge. We may get some kind of interim leadership for a period of time who will be better than Netanyahu, but not what we need. Mahmoud Abbas is 90 years old, in the 19th year of a 4-year term of office, and enjoys zero legitimacy amongst the Palestinian people. There is no question that the Palestinian people need the right to elect their new leaders. But the reality on the ground now is that elections are not really possible, not when Gaza is in ruins and 2 million people are homeless and what's going on in the West Bank. We believe that Mahmoud Abbas is the only legal reference point for appointing someone to govern. But Mahmoud Abbas has consolidated power of the executive branch, the legislative branch, which he canceled, the judicial branch, which doesn't exist because he appointed all the judges. He controls all the money and all the weapons. So there's no democracy in Palestine. There needs to be a legitimate person governing Palestine. Palestinian friends say to me, let Mahmoud Abbas be president for life. Let him have immunity. No one will touch him. No one will touch his money. No one will touch his sons, but he has to transfer power. The only way that's going to happen is if the United States, Jordan, and Egypt, and maybe a few of the other countries tell Mahmoud Abbas that that's what he needs to do, because that's what he needs to do. Nasser Kidwa was asked in the European Union, yes, Nasser Kidwa was asked in Brussels, with the 27 countries representative, if he were appointed by Abbas, would he take the job of governing Gaza for a limited period of time? And he said, you have to be crazy to want to go back to Gaza, but I'm a Palestinian leader, and I am a responsible person, and I will not avoid my responsibility. I think that he is, it's not my job to appoint him, but I think he is probably the most credible person, from my personal point of view of knowing him personally, the best person possible to form a new government in Gaza that would lead for a period of 24 to 36 months before Palestinians could have elections, that would have the credibility to negotiate Hamas, either those people who want to leave Gaza would leave, or those who don't could be integrated into a newly formed Palestinian security force that could also invite a temporary presence to to come to Gaza from Jordan, from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from any other country. That would not only serve the function that Israel wants of preventing an attack against Israel from Gaza, but would also serve as a buffer to make sure that Israel never attacks Gaza again as well. There are concrete positions, ideas, and proposals that are on the table. They're our responsibility. We need your help. And if you could enforce international law, that would be very welcome. If you could convince your government to recognize the state of Palestine, that would be helpful. All the member states of the United Nations need to recognize Palestine. Any country that talks about a two-state solution and only recognize one of those states needs to shut up or put up. So with that, one word, if I could, just about the ceasefire, and then really I'll shut up. The deal that was agreed to by Israel and Hamas about 30 days ago was a bad deal. When President Biden presented it in May, I said it was a bad deal. Any deal that takes months to implement, has no guarantees that the war won't restart, that has 1 million exit points from the agreement every single day, and doesn't achieve the end result of freeing the hostages and ending the war is a bad deal. In September, on behalf of families of hostages, I negotiated with Hamas and arrived at an agreement that they put in writing in English and in Arabic, supported, according to what I was told, by the whole Hamas leadership, that in 3 weeks would have ended the war, would have brought an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, would have released all the Israeli hostages, and agreed to number and list of Palestinian prisoners. And not only that, Hamas added to this agreement in writing and a voice message that they agreed to turn over the governance of Gaza to a civilian, professional, technocratic government. When I transmitted this to the Israeli negotiators, the response I got was, the Prime Minister doesn't want to end the war. When I transmitted it to the Qataris and the Egyptians, they told me, if Hamas brings it to us, we'll deal with it. When I said, Hamas, bring it to the Qataris and the Egyptians, they responded stupidly that that would weaken our position in negotiations. Thinking that President Biden might be interested in a legacy of the president who ended the war in Gaza, rather than being the Gaza war president, or Genocide Joe, as some people call him, I thought that maybe the President of the United States would pick up this deal. And it was transmitted to him. And it got to the head of the CIA and to his chief of staff, Brett McGurk, who was involved in the negotiations. And I met with 2 of the Israeli negotiators in Tel Aviv who told me, it's hopeless. The White House is too invested in the bad agreement that they were negotiating for months. This war could have ended in September. This war could have ended after 1 month if the President of the United States wanted it to end. They wanted it to go on, and it's still going on, and it's not ended yet. Will phase 1 complete itself? Probably. There's a good chance that both sides want to bring this to the end of phase 1. Will we get to phase 2? It seems to me at this moment very unlikely. Israel is preparing itself to renew the war. The Hamas leadership outside is losing control of Gaza inside, and there not be a break there that the people outside may not be able to negotiate for inside. We don't know. It does not look good. That's also part of our reality, and this war must end. So I agree with everyone who said here today that we need to stop fueling the war. This war has been fueled for too long by countries around the world that are enabling Israel to continue battling this war that cannot be won. There is no military victory over Hamas. There is only a political victory over Hamas, and that victory is when the Palestinian people know that they will get dignity, independence, freedom, and security. And let it be 100% clear, Israel, which has freedom and independence, and maybe dignity, will never have security if the Palestinians don't have freedom, independence, dignity, and security. It's a two-way street here. There are no winners unless we reach a peace agreement between us. That is the only victory in Israel and Palestine which is achievable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gershon, for giving us deep insights into Israeli society, politics, and even secret negotiations. Bitte fassen Sie sich jetzt ganz kurz. We only have about 20 minutes for discussion. Ganz kurze Fragen. Bitte. Da sehe ich eine Dame und einen Herrn in der Mitte etwa. Ich weiß jetzt nicht, wer
Excuse
Sie
me,
zuerst...
may I? Excuse me, Johannes. Johannes, hello.
Ja.
Because apparently your watch broke at the time you were checking Gershon's time. I mean, you were very sharp in reminding me that I had spoken more than 22 minutes.
Francesca, there's no justice.
Okay. But I guess Gershon has already answered many unasked questions.
No, I keep on noticing the kind of treatment the women receive in this part of the world. And I'm very annoyed. I'm very annoyed because I'm also a UN mandate holder, and I'm the first woman to hold this position. And I couldn't, again, I noticed that with me you are sharp at reminding, the time, and here, no, I'm really frustrated. So I ask, okay, it's fine. Go ahead, please, with the debate, it's fine.
I agree that all questions be directed to Francesca and not
No,
to
it's
me.
not about this, it's about, no, it's really unfair. That's it. Also because no, but also because there is a point. I mean, you mentioned
okay.
at the beginning. You mentioned at the beginning that it's true. I mean, people ask me, why are you on a panel with Gershon? He's a normalizer, and I said, fine. I mean, I'm not Palestinian, so I don't have to abide by it. But I really didn't know why they call you a normalizer. And I really appreciate to be here, and I will continue to talk to you, but I understand why the Palestinians think that you are a normalizer. So, it's just, and it's not something, we cannot continue. And I'm sorry, I don't speak for the Palestinian, but because the Palestinians have, like many indigenous people, be invisibilized, we need to be very careful with the words you use, and I need to make a precision. Because, and now I took like 10 points that I wanted to raise, and we will do that bilaterally, I hope. But there is one thing on which we cannot have confusion, and this is international law. Because you were confused, please. You were confusing between international law and international system. So let me be the international lawyer here. International law is a system of laws, not just the UN resolutions, but treaties, treaty obligations that the State of Israel, like the United States and all member states, including Germany, have signed. And they have an obligation to respect and include, in certain cases, ensure that they are respected. Like, for example, the law of war and the law of occupation. And these laws have never been respected. Now, I take objection on the fact that the law is not just what member states have signed as concessions. Human rights are the result of emancipation and not just a tool of emancipation. So we wouldn't have abolished slavery if it was not for people who mobilized in order to have slavery end. We wouldn't have the end of the racial segregation in the United States if it was not for people fighting for civil and political rights. And today, we have those rights. So frankly, it's not even about the UN system. It's about the law that member states have signed. And today, they have to be respected. And international law is something that Israel has invoked over and over to have justice for what Jewish people had suffered under the Holocaust and after.
So do you think that I don't agree with you?
Well, but you said, yeah, you didn't, you said in the beginning, I do not agree, I agree with you on many things, but not that international law is...
No, that's not what I said. I don't disagree with you on international law. I said, unfortunately, the reality that we live in is that international law is not effective of getting us to where we need to be. That's the problem. I have no objection to international law. I said if the international law was imposed or accepted, we wouldn't be living in the reality that we're living in. The problem is that international law is ignored, not only by Israel, but by a lot of countries around the world.
No, but this is the thing. Not always, because there have been conflicts that in fact were resolved by the United Nations. And international law was constituted the parameters to get out of the conflict. And it has happened in conflict in Central America, in Latin America, in Africa, and no peace is perfect, we agree. But here, it's not, and this is something that, this is, Gershon, something that made me not uncomfortable, but I kept on questioning, and where is this and where is that in your presentation? Because it seems that the Palestinians and the Israelis really are people who do not get along. And when you say you use terrorism selectively, it's the Palestinians who commit acts of terror, but then Israel is, no, I mean, there wouldn't be Hamas, Hamas came to existence after 25 years or 30 of occupation.
Look. Francesca, I'm on the record and I have no problem stating that terrorism, as I define it, I think is the international accepted definition of terrorism, is the use of violence against civilians for political purpose, regardless if done by individuals, organizations, or states. I have no problem.
Have you advocated for the Palestinians to have an army on their own?
This is a decision that needs to be made in the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians.
And this is where I disagree.
No, I would like us not to build peace treaties based on armies. That's part of the reality. I have no...
Agree. But we need to have self-determination as a precondition for the Palestinians to negotiate. Because, which means what the first step for me in order to advance toward peace is to grant, if you do believe in the two-state solution, the thing that is to be advocated for is the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the occupied Palestinian territory.
100%.
But this is...
Do you really believe that's going to happen without an agreement?
No, but how, look, apartheid South Africa wouldn't have been brought down by member states.
That's great. I agree. Wonderful. Continue the struggle for another 100 years. While many, many more Israelis and Palestinians die.
I'm just saying that politics...
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I think that international law needs to be followed. I think that the occupation has to end, that Israel has to withdraw from the occupied territories. Tell me how it's going to happen.
I think that this is what this is where we probably...
Excuse me, please. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I really am. And I really understand your frustration at not being granted the same amount of time. And I appreciate that you two are having such a lively discussion on stage. I would just please ask you to let our host have a chance to sort of lead us through the evening, because otherwise we're all lost. You know? So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But please give him a chance to sort of lead us through the evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not sure who was the first one to raise the hand. Okay, yeah. Very short, please, to the point.
Thank you. Francesca, I draw the attention to the women. My question is, if you have negotiated secretly, you had leaders of both sides discussing the issue, what prevented you from taking those people from the 70% of both peoples in the NGOs that are cooperating across borders. And in this case, I draw attention to Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun, who have agreed on the Mother's Call to have women at the table. Why don't you invite all those NGOs who are demonstrating on the streets, who are trying to do their best, who also have problems speaking here in Germany, for example, but why don't you take these women at the table from civil society?
Oh, can I speak? Oh.
Ja.
I have also a
Weiter hinten jemand, ein Mann mit Bart. Ja. Wir haben nur noch 7 Minuten. Bitte ganz, ganz kurz.
It's okay, it will be short. Yeah. You have said, and I quote you back, if the more the international community or international law tries to push Israel on the right side, they will only get more on the right side. And then you said that the Palestinians, even though it doesn't sound very great, they have to sort of beg the Israelis to see them as humans, more or less. And I kept thinking, when did we see the international community push Israel? There are no sanctions, there are no arms embargoes, there are basically nothing. And if a genocide did not convince the Israelis to look at Palestinians as half humans, what will Palestinians have to do in order to convince the Israeli community, which, by the way, the Israeli society, after only actually a week ago, there was a sort of survey, and 7 out of 10 Israelis have said they are in for ethnic cleansing of Gaza. I just want to say one more last thing. You said how many more of this should we do? 100 more years. The Algerian settler colonialism went on, and then after 134 years, Algeria got independence. I'm not saying this as, okay, we have 2 parties. I'm saying the party that has to be pushed to do this is the Israeli state. And until Israel and Israeli society sort of accept the the foundational paradox of coexistence that is Hassar.
Die Frage.
The question is, please, you've said the narrative is important, and I think for example, the Oslo Agreement was a peace agreement, right? But then why did it fail? Because the settlements never stopped. So I'm just I appreciate everything that you've said, and I think we should work towards this, but I think my point is not a question, it's just we have to restart the narrative every time, so yeah. Thank you.
Und die letzte Frage, der Mann, we have to conclude, der Mann mit Bart. Ja. Lassen wir den noch, er hat sich gemeldet. Ja. Ja. Very short, please. Ja.
Mr. Baskin, I would like to preface my question by saying that I do not support Hamas, but rather the Palestinian people and their struggle. Hamas oppresses its own people, shooting them in the knees and crushing dissent, as you mentioned. At the same time, Hamas is responsible for the October 7th attack. You blame Hamas, not the IDF, for bringing death and destruction upon their own people. Since 2017, Hamas's activity in Gaza has been orchestrated by the now deceased Yahya Sinwar. Without him in his position, history would have arguably taken a very different turn. The Gilad Shalit deal, which was brokered by the Mossad via back channels with Hamas that you yourself established, saw the release of Yahya Sinwar from prison. Do you also see part of the responsibility of the suffering for both the Palestinians and the Israelis on your behalf?
Who wants to go first?
Please.
Thanks. You know, I'm almost, no. Look, I think that there has not been effective pressure on Israel ever, and Israel has enjoyed impunity from the international community since day one. This is the reality. If you believe you can change that reality and force Israel to make the changes that it needs to make, then I would support that. I think that Israelis need to feel it in their pocket. I think that it's happening anyway. The world for Israelis is getting smaller and smaller. There are fewer and fewer countries that Israelis feel comfortable traveling to. We saw this during the war, the reality when almost all foreign airlines stopped flying to Israel. They managed to make some changes of establishing or buying some other airlines that created opportunities for them to leave. If you think that you can create the kind of pressure on Israel to make Israel end its occupation, then I fully support it. Fully support it. I have less confidence in your ability, in our ability, in Francesca's ability to remove Israel's impunity. And I, quite frankly, don't want to continue living in this conflict. I know that this conflict can end. And of course, ending the conflict means ending the occupation and allowing Palestinians to have freedom. And if in order to have peace, Francesca, the Palestinians have to have an army, let them have an army. I don't really care. I would quote Faisal Husseini, who said, who are we going to use this army against? Let's be real for a minute. What is a Palestinian tank's value? Faisal said, I would rather invest our money in the Palestinian computer than the Palestinian tank, but it's their decision. It's a sovereign decision of a sovereign nation. If they want to waste their money on an army that's not going to be able to beat anyone, let them do it. I don't care. It's not a matter of principle for me. With regard to Yahya Sinwar, I opened up a back channel between Israel and Hamas. I was approached by Hamas to do it 1 week after Gilad Shalit was abducted. I kept those channels open and alive for 5 years. And after 5 years of not achieving anything, and a new guy was put in charge of the file by Netanyahu, a Mossad officer, I made contact with him and told him I had direct links to Hamas. And after 3 weeks, he decided to use me, and I opened up a negotiating channel. I had nothing to do with the release of any of the prisoners. I didn't deal with the names of anyone. I'm not going to go into what I did do. It's not important. The Israeli security did not think that Yahya Sinwar was important or dangerous because he was serving 5 life sentences, I believe, for killing Palestinians. He never killed Israelis. He killed Palestinians. So they underestimated his risk, the risk of releasing him. Am I sorry about the role that I played in doing that deal? Absolutely not. I have no regrets whatsoever. The regrets that I have was that I was not able to create the negotiations between Israel and Palestine on ending the conflict. October 7th did not happen because of Yahya Sinwar. October 7th happened, and I said this because you can't occupy another people for 56 years and expect to have peace. And you can't lock 2.3 million people in a territory like Gaza and expect to have quiet. As the Secretary General of the United Nations said, October 7th happened in a context. I agree with him. It happened with a context. And we are dealing with the context of that now, and we will continue to deal with it until we figure out how to get out of it.
I am so sorry that we have to come to an end.
Please give some time.
Francesca, do you want to?
Yes. It was not directed at you, of course, and I really enjoyed the discussion. And in fact, I would like we had more time. It's watch broke, unfortunately. However, the thing that I wanted to add, and then I will ask your question, is that there is so much that I agree with you on of what you said. And probably what I find piercing is, and again, maybe it's just a shortcut into the present, because you are a pragmatic, and I'm a pedantic lawyer, a pedantic human rights lawyer. But the fact it's the both sidism. Palestinians kill each other. We cannot liquidate the fact that one is the oppressor and has been the oppressor for 75 years. I mean, it's true. I insist as well. My mandate is on the 57 on the occupied territory for the past 57 years. And still, for the Palestinians, the plight is that of a dismembered nation. They are all Nakba survivors, and we cannot forget it. So if you just have it's about also compassion toward the other. Acknowledgement means a lot, and I don't think it will change anything of where you want to go. International law is there to set the limits to politics at the international level as well as the national level. So in a state that violates the laws, you would have accountability, you would have protests. Otherwise, the state can easily turn into a dictatorship, right? Same thing at the international level. I'm very scared of a multilateral order that moves toward lawlessness. And the fact that it has existed is precisely for what I was trying to say, that there is the system has never been truly equal. The system has never delivered and has never served everyone in the same way, but now it's as under threat as ever. And maybe it can lead this moment where the US president says things as grotesque as unlawful. This is the moment to possibly explore another kind of partnership at the international level. But my point is international law, and which in places like this, not in Israel, it's difficult, but in places like this, where international law is also a source of domestic law, like in my own country and other European countries, the violations of international law of Israel that the German state is complicit with have to be held accountable. Again, I'm not a politician, but I think that this is necessary because accountability will pull the brake of political hubris. Women, of course, should be part of the negotiating table. I think that women in Israel and from the occupied Palestinian territory have tried for years. There were the women in black and others. They have tried. But the problem is that the table needs to be put at the end of a process. And I insist, the Palestinians need to be given the opportunity to exercise their right of self-determination without people from outside, and I'm not talking of you, I'm talking of member states, telling them what to do. And this is the thing, if international law was like the human rights of the Palestinians, where the perimeter within which negotiation would happen, I'm sure that the Palestinians would feel more reassured. That's it. I know. I don't know how it's going to happen. I think we should discuss.
Okay. I'm sorry. This was not quite how the night was supposed to go. Although I did promise that we were all going to feel uncomfortable, and I certainly feel uncomfortable. All right. I just wanted to say thank you very much. Sorry about how this went.
Why? It went well, but that's it. It went well.
Okay. Sorry specifically for the time that you weren't allotted, is what I mean.
No, it's not about that.
Okay.
It's for the time, because he never checked the time.
He did.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Just they didn't say it.
We'll check the video.
Point
thanks.
said,
All right,
that's
okay.
it.
So,
let's move on.
what I was going to say.
No, it's not true.
I would like more time as well, but we need to end the evening right about now. And I was going to plug some events, but I don't think we're really in the mood, so just know that there's some more peace conference events going on tomorrow. And, okay, what's going on? There's a workshop called Samba für den Frieden, Trommelworkshop für Einsteigerinnen mit Thomas Rödel, starting at 10 a.m. If you want to attend, please ask outside at the DFG-VK Infostand. Another is called Friedensfähig statt Erstschlagfähig für ein Europa ohne Mittelstreckenwaffen with Simon Bödecker from Ohne Rüstung Leben. And this starts at 11 a.m. at the Eine Welthaus. And then there's the Nachbetrachtung der Konferenzbeobachter der Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz at der Abtei St. Bonifaz, starting 4:30 p.m. And last but not least, there's the Friedensgebet der Religionen taking place at 6:30 p.m. at the Abtei St. Bonifaz. Now, I want to thank everyone who made this event possible. I want to thank our video and audio technicians in the back, Johannes and Andy. Thank you so much. You've been wonderful. We want to thank the people from a Smart Village, this event location, who came under a lot of pressure for hosting us, but stuck with us anyway. Special thanks to Petra and Freddy, who hosted us yesterday and tonight, and who made sure we had a good time. Thank you. I want to thank everyone from the Trägerkreis and everyone who volunteered to help make this event happen. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. There's so many names, I can't list them right now, and I'm afraid I'll forget people. But one I want to name who stands representative of all of these people, and this is Maria Feckel over here, who worked absolutely tirelessly and with full determination for months on end. And she weathered every storm that came up. Please come up on stage, and we've got some goodie bags that we wanted to... Now, I fucked up. All right. Feel hugged. Yep. Wonderful. And these are our hosts from Smart Village. This is Petra and Freddy. Give a round of applause to them, please. Moving on to our host, Johannes Zang, who had probably the most difficult job tonight. Thank you so much.
Danke.
And thank you the most, of course, to our esteemed guests and speakers, Francesca Albanese and Dr. Gershon Baskin. All right, and now that we're all revved up, I think this might be a good time to hear some peaceful and serene music that takes us back to a place where we can all agree that we're trying to make the world a better place. So please stick with us for a brief piece of music before you leave. Thank you all so much for coming.
Mm-hmm.